economics, education, entertainment, labor, law, politics, religion, sex, and war. If you do not understand racism, which is white supremacy, what it is and how it works, everything else that you understand will only confuse you. Confuse you. Confuse you. Confuse you. Confuse you. If you do not understand, confuse you. If you do not understand, confuse you. If you do not understand, confuse you. Confuse you.
My definition of white supremacy and racism, I use those two terms as synonyms. I use the same definition for both terms. That definition is as follows: a global system of people who classify themselves as white and are dedicated to abusing and or subjugating everyone in the known universe whom they classify as not white.
Economics, education, entertainment, labor, law, politics, religion, sex, and war.
There is a fifth dimension, beyond that which is known to man. It is a dimension as vast as space and as timeless as infinity. It is the middle ground between light and shadow, between science and superstition, and it lies between the pit of man's fears and the summit of his knowledge. This is the dimension of imagination. It is an area which we call the Twilight Zone.
Now the strangest thing about this show on tune is its host, Bert Wilkins, and he brings it to you. Features and creature features and more creatures and more features. Gonna get you tonight.
Thank you.
What is your background?
I'm an actor.
Where are you?
I act.
What is the last thing I might have seen you in?
I act on my job all the time.
Can you give me a little performance, some sort of
I do all sorts of kind of things, man. Whatever you need me to do, I even do Shakespeare shit,
We'll do some Shakespeare.
To be or not to be, that's a motherfucking question. That is the motherfucking question, And in Hamlet is this scene, where this brother Laertes was asking, the king that he wanted to go to Paris and shit. The king asked his daddy, could he go? And his daddy say, he hath my lord wrung from me by labors and petition.
Was there any more to it, or is that what's pretty much...
Basically, you said just let that motherfucker go, It's like, let him go,
Right.
I was working on this piece because I was sitting there going, I realized that, when I was looking at it, that niggas is a beautiful thing, And...
Okay.
Write that
down. And, so it came to me, waste away your life and linger. Sitting at home watching Jerry Springer. Do blackface and a monkey shine. And cut a jig at the same time. Cause niggas is a beautiful thing. Niggas is a beautiful thing. Hit me. Niggas is a beautiful thing. Niggas is a beautiful thing. Then the artists be getting in with that.
I'm digging that. I am so digging that. Niggers is a beautiful
thing. I got it here.
It'll get into a gospel thing, you know. Stand up if you a nigga. Hey, because you know it's about keeping it real. You know, it's about keeping it real, man.
Yes, I'm feeling you. Feeling you.
Lord, Mr. Henry, these monkey shines like to have me bust the scene.
To talk about tap dance, man, first of all, I just want to salute Jeremiah Burkett, who's done an amazing job as tap dance man. You know, he really took that character off the page, which was an amazing character, but really breathed like some life into it and took it somewhere that no one expected. Me just acting opposite him, like it brought the best out in me. Do you know what I mean? He was so good.
We just loved us a picture show, don't we, Mr. Henry?
When Henry's in the diner with the tap dance man and laughing, and then you pull back and no one's there and he's by himself in the diner, he's losing his mind with the happenings of what's going on. So it was a tough concept to play opposite against as well. You know what I mean? Like seeing yourself like that. This abomination of a black man with these big white teeth and big eyes. And that is how I guess Henry felt that the world was viewing him, even though he was a man with pride.
I thought. Oh, so that. Don't you ever in your life let them know you thinking. You like to get us killed.
You know what's more difficult than creating a character like the tap dance man? It's blackface. There is a history of white folks donning some abomination of blackness, and that is an actual practice that has existed in this country, to me is far more gruesome and far more disturbing than creating a character that actually harkens the time.
When they gonna stop taking from you, Mr. Henry?
They won't.
Yes, sir. What you want me to be, master? Anything for you, sir. I'll sing for you. I'll tap dance for you, master. I'll coon for you. Anything just make you laugh, master. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
There are words quite common a century ago that trigger anger and embarrassment today. Words like Sambo and coon, which are reviled these days as racial slurs. You can put the name of one performer in the same category, Stepin Fetchit. Lincoln Perry adopted that stage name during his years on the black minstrel circuit and became famous as the lazy, shiftless character in early Hollywood movies. Because he portrayed a stereotype, some denounced him as Hollywood's Uncle Tom, but because he played it so well, he also won praise for brilliant comic timing and for the sly spark of intelligence inside his shuffling, sleepy-eyed character. If you have questions about the life of Lincoln Perry or Stepin Fetchit, our number is 800-989-8255. That's 800-989-TALK. The email address is totn@npr.org. Mel Watkins joins us now from our bureau in New York to talk about his new biography, Stepin Fetchit, The Life and Times of Lincoln Perry. And it's good to have you back on Talk of the Nation.
It's great being here.
Stepin Fetchit can be safely called the first black star in Hollywood. Ordinarily, he would have been lionized, yet he is considered today by most people an embarrassment.
Yes, and it's a consequence of the times, basically, the consequence of the racial situation in this country at that time, and the fact that, perhaps most prominently, that no other images were on the screen except derogatory comic images at that point.
Where did he develop this character?
The character really is based in folklore and black folklore, and it's something called putting on old massa, which the slaves developed as a way of dealing with unwanted work and unpaid work and so forth. It was a way of getting out of the tedious work that they were required to do, and also of, in a way, putting on whites in general in order to get what you wanted. That is, it became a sort of a hustle, a ploy that blacks used. And in the late, I guess, 19th century, it began to be used as a a comic device by MIDI comedians. It was very popular in black cabarets on the Theater Owners Booking Association tour, and all across the nation, comics were using it. Bert Williams, in fact, was famous for it, and Bert Williams, less reviled than Stepin Fetchit, but the character that he did was much the same.
The name Stepin Fetchit came from a double act that Lincoln Perry used to perform.
Yes, he had performed as a team, as most black comics did at that time, and it was called Step and Fetchit. When he broke up with his partner and decided to go solo, he once mused that he didn't know whether he was Step or Fetchit, but so he decided to take both names.
And Lincoln Perry himself, from an interesting background, as you point out, his mother fostered the church in him. His father fostered the love of stage and travel, and maybe not so religious observances.
Absolutely, his father was a sort of a traveling man and an amateur vaudevillian who was away from home a lot of times, and he would take his son Lincoln with him at times, and I think that's where Lincoln Perry developed his love of the stage, and he displayed a lot of talent at an early age. He was outgoing, extroverted type who loved to play jokes on people and was quite outspoken, actually.
How did he get to Hollywood?
He traveled, he was on the Black Theatrical Tour, which traveled all over the country, basically in southern states, and he left Chicago in around 1926. At that point, he was a writer for the Chicago Defender, which most people don't know because it has been alleged that by some that he couldn't read, which is obviously not true. He wrote for the Chicago Defender and wrote columns as he traveled throughout the Midwest and onto the West, and he arrived in Hollywood in 1926. At that point, no blacks basically were in movies. Only two had appeared in movies. That was James Lau and Charles Gilpin and a few others, Noble Johnson and one of the Our Gang kids. When he arrived there, whites mostly played the roles of blacks in blackface in movies. But they decided to make a movie called In Old Kentucky, which had been made 3 times before with all white actors. And he went and tried out for it and sort of impressed everyone there because he went in character. He went in as if he were befuddled, didn't know where he was, didn't even know he was trying out for a part. And the director and producers immediately took to him and assigned him the role.
So he was putting on massa again?
Again. His whole life, in fact, I compare him to a hustler throughout this book because he, a trickster rather, his whole life was based on that. He understood the racial situation. He was a very intelligent man. He understood the racial situation and he played it. He played it as best he could because he was also very ambitious and he knew that the only way at that time that he could become a star, which he wanted to be, was to play along with those roles.
And he did play along.
Yes, he did. So much so that at one point, by the 1930s, Stepin Fetchit and Amos and Andy were the most popular and well-known black characters in the United States. Of course, Amos and Andy at that point were being played by 2 whites on radio, but they still were popular characters. Stepin Fetchit was himself, and he was undoubtedly one of the top 5 performers in this country. There were others, Bojangles Robinson for the stage, and people like Duke Ellington, who was just breaking in music and so forth.
But a person who enjoyed this fame and the wealth that came with it and lived rather flamboyantly.
He lived flamboyantly and ostentatiously. It was a time when Hollywood actors had just come into their own, and most Hollywood actors at that point were living flamboyantly. They were living with gold-plated bathrooms and $20,000 cars and so forth. Stepin Fetchit did his best to emulate what was going on in the Hollywood Hills with white actors. He thought that if he was a star, that he should live like a star.
You mentioned that he came to Hollywood in 1926, right at the end of the silent era, and of course the comic timing, the patter that he developed all those years in minstrel shows made him a natural for talking movies.
Yes, and in fact, about 1928, there was a rumor that was spread in Hollywood that blacks were somehow better suited for talking movies. The voices were deeper or something, and they sang, and therefore they would be better in talking movies. And this rumor went around, and so Hollywood decided to make 2 spectacular black movies, one Hallelujah, one called Hearts and Dixie. Stepin Fetchit was chosen to star in Hearts and Dixie, and that's the movie that really made his name. In fact, Robert Benchley later wrote about that he's the best actor that the talking pictures have produced.
We don't have a clip from that movie, but we do have one from a film called Richard's Reply, in which Lincoln Perry plays that Stepin Fetchit role. He described himself sometimes as the world's laziest man.
Absolutely.
I get lazy, though. I can't get all my sleep. I rest well at night and sleep good in the daytime, but in the afternoon, when I really need to relax, I just seem to toss and turn. I don't know.
Richard can't get him up. How can I get him up? Bring that chick here to the phone. He's no clown, but she'll break him down.
Stepin Fetchit in a clip from the movie Richard's Reply. And Mel Watkins, one of the interesting things about your book is to learn that this guy who was a major player in early Hollywood, most of his scenes have been cut out of the movies that still survive.
Yes, it's very difficult to find movies intact with him. I had to go to archival institutions and to see many of the movies. A few are available. The one that you just played, Richard's Reply, is available on tape or, I guess, DVD.
Mm-hmm.
And that happens to be one of the best examples of his humor because he is not in a film. He's not playing the role of Stepin Fetchit. He's simply doing more or less his stage act, in which he was much more articulate. You mentioned earlier that he had come from silent films, and what he did in most of the movies that are available is something he called audible pantomime. And he did it for two reasons. First of all, he felt that it was funnier and that therefore he could take advantage of his very great ability to do pantomime. And secondly, he was unsatisfied with the lines written for him by the people who wrote the scripts and refused on many occasions to deliver those lines. So what he would do is eliminate most of it and simply fudge them in one way or another, or just eliminate them altogether. And that's why it's so difficult to hear what he's saying in many movies. And one critic compared him to, or said that he was as inscrutable as James Joyce, for instance.
As inscrutable as James Joyce?
Yes.
We'll let that go for a minute, but I did... I did want to ask you, James Joyce is pretty inscrutable, but I did want to ask you, as a black man, to go in and watch this performance, how did you feel about it?
I must admit that there are some scenes in which you actually cringe. And then I started to realize why. It's because the movies are set up at a time in American history that the racial situation demanded a certain kind of observance of popular mores, and therefore even in movies with Will Rogers, an actor with whom Lincoln Perry got along with very well,
mm-hmm.
they really made what were the buddy movies of that time. But unlike the buddy movies of today, where you have actors like Martin Lawrence or Eddie Murphy acting with white actors and assuming an equal role, there was the inherent inequality that came from the societal or racial arrangements of the time. So it's an actual reflection of what was going on. So if you can look past the sometimes painful maneuverings and actions of Stepin Fetchit, you also see something about America. And, what you have to realize is it wasn't made up. This is what America was like. And here's a man who, even given that situation, was able to rise to stardom in Hollywood, and I think that's fairly phenomenal.
We're talking with Mel Watkins about his new book, Stepin Fetchit, The Life and Times of Lincoln Perry, and you're listening to Talk of the Nation from NPR News. And let's get a caller involved in the conversation, 800-989-8255 if you'd like to join us. And this is Mark calling us from Redding, California.
Yes, I once watched a movie on TV with Stepin Fetchit opposite Will Rogers, and in the course of the movie, Will Rogers asked him if he could play Dixie, and he said, "Yes, sir, and I can play Marching Through Georgia, too."
Yes, that's from Judge Priest.
Will Rogers said, "Don't do that. I've already saved you from one lynch mob today. I don't want to try for a second."
Yes, that's from Judge Priest, and that's a scene that's one of the things that Will Rogers and Lincoln Perry inserted into those films. They going against the grain of the times. Those lines upset a lot of people in the South, and even though the film in general bows to or observes all of the racial arrangements that the South expected.
I thought it was a wonderful line myself.
It is. It's a very funny line. I just saw that movie recently, and it's a delightful film. It's unfortunately it's not available many places. The Museum of Modern Art has it, and I think the Museum of Television and Radio also has it available.
Mark, thanks very much.
Sure thing.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
And let's try Jim. And Jim is with us from Norman, Oklahoma.
How you doing?
All right.
Yes, my question is there any truth to something I heard years and years ago that Stepin Fetchit was alleged to have taught Muhammad Ali the rope-a-dope punch that he used to knock out, I think it was Sonny Liston, but I'm not certain, but there was a glancing blow that didn't look like it could have knocked anybody out, and the other fighter went down like a stack of bricks, and later Muhammad Ali claimed that he was taught that punch by Lincoln Perry. Is that true?
The punch was indeed Sonny Liston. Rope-a-dope was much later in his career, George Foreman. But anyway, Mel Watkins, go ahead.
Yes, well, both Muhammad Ali and Lincoln Perry attest to that. And it's possible, since Lincoln Perry was a good friend of Jack Johnson's. In fact, they used to hang out on Central Avenue together, and which also flies in the face of the report that Stepin Fetchit was an Uncle Tom. Jack Johnson, in fact, was one of the most controversial figures of his time, and exactly the opposite of an Uncle Tom, as was Muhammad Ali, and they were both friends of Stepin Fetchit. But Stepin Fetchit did say that he taught Muhammad Ali that punch. Muhammad Ali agreed. I'm skeptical, personally.
I just wonder what the physics of such a lesson would have been.
Yes.
Well, he said that was a punch that Jack Johnson had used often, and that it was a matter of balance and faking someone into moving in a certain direction and then using their own inertia or using their own force along with the punch.
Those were skills that Lincoln Perry probably possessed as well, given his craft, so I guess it's not absolutely impossible.
Well, he professed a lot of things, that's for sure. He was a very ambitious man, and it was very difficult to tell when he was telling the truth. So everything had to be checked.
Jim,
Thank you.
Thanks very much for the call. And that we don't think of Stepin Fetchit and Lincoln Perry being in a room with Muhammad Ali much later. He lived a long time after his celebrity waned, and you paint a picture of a man, a much older man, who I guess was having some difficulty realizing just how out of time he was.
Yes, he was, and what surfaced at this point was when he began being attacked by leaders in the civil rights movement. Given his rather surly personality and his aggressiveness, he simply attacked back, and he attacked civil rights leaders, including Martin Luther King and various other people who had criticized him and alleged that they didn't know what they were talking about, that if they had understood the times, that they would have seen that what he did was actually progressive. And in many ways, he was right. But it's the politics of race colliding head-on with entertainment and the evolution of entertainment to a certain extent. And there was really nothing to do about it. The politicians, I felt, had to do what they did because the images on the screen needed to be corrected, and certain people had to be sacrificed. Unfortunately, Stepin Fetchit was one of them.
75 years after he made his movies, is it time now to reevaluate Stepin Fetchit and maybe to look at him differently?
That's why I wrote the book. I think it is. I think we've moved to a point now where those old wounds have healed to a certain extent, and I think we can look back at history. We do not need to look at it from the extreme viewpoint of a political situation where it was necessary to criticize those actors who did that. In doing so, it's almost as if we're criticizing slaves for picking cotton. I think people work in certain situations. They work within a certain context, and they have to deal with that context. So we can look at it now, I think. We can look back and see what a marvelous comic this man was, what a marvelous actor he was. He was so good, in fact, that many of the leading actors at the time refused or didn't want to be on screen with him because they said he stole every scene he was in. Even Marlon Brando would later say that he studied some of Stepin Fetchit's old movies to pick up on certain acting techniques.
Mel Watkins, thanks very much.
You're welcome.
Mel Watkins' new book is Stepin Fetchit, The Life and Times of Lincoln Perry. He joined us from our bureau in New York.
Niggas is a beautiful thing.
Same thing with Stepin Fetchit. And Stepin Fetchit made more money than anybody in Hollywood at the time. There wasn't a white movie came out that made more money than Stepin Fetchit's movies.
Wow. You know what I learned about him is the fact that he was an intellectual. I know he used to write for the Chicago Defender.
Mm-hmm.
He was a very brilliant guy.
Yeah, and he was the #1 pimp in L.A.
I didn't know that.
He had 1,000 white women in the street and couldn't nobody fuck with him. That's how powerful he was, including white cops.
That's Fetchit. Wow.
Had him 100 Bentleys, okay?
Wow, that's amazing.
And he'd beat a hole down in the street, man, and wouldn't nobody touch him.
Wow. See, I need to put that out there. I got a friend. He's an advocate for Stepin Fetchit because he thought that the NAACP was wrong and how they derailed his film career. How they just targeted him, in terms of him being a bad stereotype for black people.
And he said he was mad at them?
Well, no, he was like, my friend, he's a big Stepin Fetchit fan.
No, I said, and who was mad at them?
Oh, the NAACP. The Hollywood branch.
I said, who was mad at the NAACP?
Oh, no, I ain't say he wasn't mad. I didn't say nobody was mad at it. I'm sorry, I didn't say that. I didn't meant to say that. I meant to say that the NAACP boycotted his career, or they went out their way to try to steal his career. Like the
but he didn't come out and hit him with the Spin-Gall Awards named after a white boy? Huh? That's what ignorance will do for your ass. Spin-Gall named after a white boy who was president and invented the NAACP.
A lot of folks didn't know that. I know I talked to some people recently. I mean, black people, we don't. It's like when I went to Selma, I interviewed some older black people. They wasn't even aware of Selma until the movie came out.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm saying, like, how can I blame the young people when a lot of the elders don't know, or a lot of the elders don't share what they know?
Hey man, that's who we were. See, everybody forget.
Mm-hmm.
We came out of slavery, and wasn't nobody there to wash our feet and wash all that shit off of us.
Yes, sir.
So wait, let me hit the bed, man.
No, Baba Greg, I thank you so much. You take care of yourself.
Okay,
hey,
be right here.
Yes, sir. All right.
Yes, sir. What you want me to be, master? Anything for you, sir. I'll sing for you. I'll tap dance for you, master. I'll coon for you. Anything just make you laugh, master. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
In the past 50 years, 33,000 feature films have been made in the United States, and about 6,000 of them have had parts for black actors. For the most part, the black portraits have been drawn by white writers, white producers, and white directors for a white audience. Most black parts were the way white Americans wanted them to be. The black male was consistently shown as nobody, nothing. He had no qualities that could be admired by any man, or more particularly, any woman.
When the sun goes down, the tide goes down, we dark together around and they all begin to shout, hey, hey, Uncle Doug didn't feed the...
White people didn't like to think much about them. Sort of like a relative you got in a rest home. I mean, happy darkies, dancing and singing was all they wanted to hear about. Being good Christians, the whites out front liked to think the blacks out back were kind of happy. Uncle Tom's Cabin was one of the first movies made that tried to say anything about black people. Uncle Tom was changed a little each time it was put on the stage, and all the parts were played by white actors, and by the time they made a movie of it in 1903, Uncle Tom was just the white man's idea of a good nigger. You might say he was what H. Rap Brown ain't. They made this picture 5 times, and by the time they finished with it, Mickey Rooney could have played Uncle Tom. Minstrel shows started as the black man's entertainment for himself and the plantation owners. When they were filmed, though, they were done by a white cast. You figure that out. They were done as sort of a joke, and the black entertainer couldn't even get a job making fun of himself. The first really vicious anti-Negro film was called The Birth of a Nation, and it was a honey. And the second worst thing about it was that technically in 1918 it was the best movie that had ever been made. A cat named D.W. Griffith produced it, and he knew how. See? Birth of a Nation pretended to tell the story of the Civil War and what happened afterwards when the slaves were freed. White women couldn't walk on their own sidewalk, if you believe the picture. In the South, Negroes got the right to vote, and the movie showed black vote collectors refusing to accept white votes, and black people sneaking in extra votes. And if these black bad guys don't look very bad to you, it's probably because they were white actors wearing burnt cork. Negro legislators took over in the South, and in the film they were made to look like apes. And this was the movie version of how it looked in the Southern state legislature. They drank whiskey, they ate chicken with their hands in the State House, and they put their feet up on the table with the shoes off. And of course, they passed all sorts of crazy laws according to the film, like anybody could marry anybody they wanted to. It was obvious to anyone who saw this picture that Negroes weren't fit to govern themselves or anyone else because they really weren't people. This film is 50 years old, and it may look silly and out of date now, but it didn't look silly when it was made and seen. Several million Americans who saw it were propagandized to believe that this is the way things would be if they weren't careful. So they've been pretty careful. Colonel Cameron, a former officer in the Confederate Army, is all upset over the way Northerners and the freed slaves are changing his South, taking the mint julep right out of his mouth. So he takes a walk one day while he's worrying about it, and he sees two white kids playing, and then four black kids come along. Being hardly human and naturally afraid of ghosts, the black kids run. Colonel Cameron sees the whole scene, gets his great idea, and with this, that great white all-American organization, the KKK, was born. The cavalry and the bedsheet has come to the rescue. The South is saved. In this picture, the Ku Klux Klan was the good boy who saved the South. Most Hollywood films, though, even the early ones, weren't really nasty. Nobody was sitting around saying, hey, let's take care of the niggers. What producers were doing was making money. And to make money, they made pictures that white ticket buyers would enjoy. They showed Negroes the way most Americans like to think of them. To blame Hollywood is like throwing a rock at the mirror because you don't like what you see in it. Bert Williams was one of the great vaudeville performers. He couldn't get parts in white pictures, so he made a lot of short comedies. He played the part most Americans consider typical Negro. He wasn't bad, really, just lazy, stupid, and happy the way he was. And his feet hurt. He was afraid of most everything. And when he was scared, he shook and his teeth chattered. Unlike a scared white man, the black man's eyes could pop out of his head. And when he was so scared he couldn't talk. And he was also so scared he couldn't run. Black women, on the other hand, were steady and imperturbable. They stood like a rock on the face of things that scared black men. Another strange physical characteristic was when they were really very scared, the guys turned white. When you look back on these old films, the patterns come jumping out at you. The most consistent thing about them was the attack on the black man. He was never even given the privilege of being a man. He was a boy, as in, you know, here, boy. They had a lot of other great qualities besides being cowardly. For instance, they stole chickens.
Who's in there? Who's in there? Ain't nobody in here but us chickens.
They shot craps.
Dice, your papa talking to you now, Dice. Come on. Just hit it one more time.
And lions weren't the only thing they were afraid of either. They were afraid of gorillas.
Wonderful. Is that you next to me? Wonderful. Is that you next? Now, come on, Wonderful. Now, don't start arguing. Come on, tell me the truth. Is that you next to me? Wonderful, please say yes, that's you.
They were also afraid of ghosts and skeletons.
Jeff? Is that you scratching my head? Jeff? Jeff! Now, come on, now, what are you looking at?
What's your hurry, Buzz?
Even when they were little boys, they had these characteristics. Farida in our gang was the boy. The tradition of the lazy, stupid, crap-shooting, chicken-stealing idiot was popularized by an actor named Lincoln Theodore Monroe Andrew Perry. The cat made $2 million in 5 years in the middle 30s, and everyone who ever saw a movie laughed at Stepin Fetchit.
Come out, wherever you is, wherever you be, wherever you do. Come out, wherever you am. How's the government looking for you?
Where you going, stranger?
You scare somebody stiff like that. I'm looking for hillbillies as you were.
I ain't saying I am and I ain't saying I ain't.
Well, that's close enough for me, 'cause I'm tired of walking myself. The government told me I got to bring in a hillbilly, so you come go with me to Washington.
I ain't a-going.
That's the color of another horse. Well, I tell you, you don't go for me. We go for the Navy.
No!
I don't go for the Navy. Well, I tell you, go for the Army.
No, I won't go for the Army.
No, I won't go for Texas.
It's too bad he was as good at it as he was. The character he played was planted in a lot of people's head, and they remember it the rest of their lives as clear as an auto accident.
What's that? Are you an Indian?
Yes, man, you don't know. I got Army Indian. I got 1 for the Cherokee, 2 for Seminole, and I got 4/5 Hiawatha.
Wait a minute. Hiawatha was a woman.
I can't help it. I got 4/5 of her.
He played in movies with other actors who were as American as Mom's raspberry jello. If they accepted the stereotype, how wrong could it be?
Judge Rickman, can I see you some, please?
Well, I'm pretty busy.
Yes, but I just want to ask if you heard about it.
Hear about what?
About over at my house, night before last.
Oh, another baby?
Yes, you sure guessed it, you heard.
What's his name?
Oh, we call him L.R. Elias Rigby Livingston.
Oh, named him after me, did you?
Yes, Elias Rigby. I told my wife, Ethel, I said, honey, I know Judge sure gonna be gratified.
Well, of course, yes, I appreciate the honor.
Yes,
I suppose a compliment, and I ought to do something for you.
Yes, that's what I thought.
You come over to my place tomorrow, and I'll give you a job.
Yeah.
Rake and leave.
I asked you to wait.
Yes, sir. What you want me to be, master? Anything for you, sir. I'll sing for you. I'll tap dance for you, master. I'll coon for you. Anything just to make you laugh, master. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Although he never won an Oscar, Lincoln Perry was America's first black movie star. But for that distinction, Perry paid a price. And that price had everything to do with the character he played. NPR's Roy Hurst examines the bigger-than-life story of the entertainer who called himself Stepin Fetchit.
It was 1927 when a young Chitlin Circuit performer named Lincoln Perry arrived in California bent on breaking into the motion picture business. Hollywood had just begun hiring black entertainers for bit parts and for work as extras. Fox Studios was looking to cast a Negro for the silent film In Old Kentucky, and Lincoln Perry found himself in line among a slew of other black actors auditioning for the part.
And he saw these people around him and said, okay, how do I make myself stand out in this environment?
Film historian Mel Watkins.
And he simply began doing his stick. That is the laziest man in the world. He acted completely befuddled. He acted as if he didn't know where he was, and he immediately got the attention of the producers and the director of the film. He was chosen for the part on that basis. They didn't know what to make of him. They were astounded by him.
He was signed as a Fox Studio contract player. Lincoln Perry, otherwise known as Stepin Fetchit, would become the very first African-American movie star.
Ghost. She was at the door, Jeff.
Me, Jeff, if that's a ghost, that ain't no job for gentlemen of color. That calls for a regimental chaplain, and you know we done buried him at Shiloh.
But Stepin Fetchit's stick, at least when viewed through a modern lens, will almost certainly make you cringe.
My feet get me to the door now, not just I'll go if you want me to.
The character of Stepin Fetchit was almost always a shiftless, dim-witted, mumbling, bumbling fool.
Like most people now, I only thought of him as a symbol of a negative side of the African-American experience.
Mel Watkins has written a biography of America's first black movie star. It's called Stepin Fetchit, The Life and Times of Lincoln Perry.
And when I started to do some research on him, I found out, no, this is an amazingly complex man. He was intelligent, and he was anything but what people take him to be.
Well, I, of course, remember him very well.
John Hope Franklin is perhaps Black America's most celebrated historian, and at 91, he is also old enough to be considered a Stepin Fetchit contemporary.
He was perpetuating a stereotype, that is, the lazy, ne'er-do-well, black, irresponsible person, one who, if he thought hard, he would go to sleep, and he had no capacity to cope with the modern world, and so he lived in a kind of make-do world of his own, which was not terribly responsible. Now that's the picture that we had of Stepin Fetchit in the 20s, 30s, and that's the picture I continue to have of him.
By the mid-30s, when Stepin Fetchit was at his peak, people like John Hope Franklin and the NAACP were putting pressure on Hollywood to rid the screen of his image. The esteemed civil rights patriarch W.E.B. Du Bois even went so far as to suggest that blacks stop doing comedy altogether. Again, Mel Watkins.
What he was saying is that in given American society, we can't afford to present a comic image because it's always going to be misinterpreted.
In other words, the likes of Stepin Fetchit was keeping mainstream white society from viewing blacks as capable of joining the mainstream.
I think they need to relax, take an enema. It's comedy, man.
That's comedian Jimmy Walker. He knows something about being called a negative image. His was the breakout character in the 70s sitcom Good Times. His portrayal of J.J. Evans was criticized as being a return to minstrelsy.
And the way they make it sound is like black people are permanently harmed by Stepin Fetchit or Jimmy Walker or whomever it may be. And I don't agree with that. With Stepin Fetchit, I still don't feel it's a bad character. I think it's a funny character. My philosophy of comedy is someone has to take the pie.
Jimmy Walker says that for all the black middle-class complaints about Stepin Fetchit, ordinary poor and working-class black Americans understood him. Mel Watkins agrees. He says the character of Stepin Fetchit is actually a subversive trickster. He points out that Stepin Fetchit never really got around to fetching anything.
I'm coming, Judge, I'm coming.
Come on, reach under the bed and get it for me.
I'm just getting ready to reach under there for it now.
But why do I have to tell you every morning to reach under the bed for it?
Just got up a little, I know you. And more power to your elbow, Judge.
Stepin Fetchit generally pretends not to understand what people are saying to him. He goes off on a tangent. They'll ask him one question, he'll start talking about something else and wandering off, and finally they either become exasperated or say, all right, I'll do it myself. And blacks, when he began, understood it perfectly and laughed heartily at it.
Tear my tongue out by the roots before I tell it.
Is my bath ready?
Yeah, I fixed that before I left.
Watkins says Stepin Fetchit laughed, too, all the way to the bank. By the mid-1930s, America's only black movie star had become a millionaire, and he let everyone know it.
He was a person who would flaunt that and shove it in your face.
Perry wore furs and $2,000 suits. He owned a fleet of expensive convertibles, which he would sometimes roll out all at the same time with chauffeurs.
He was Diddy before Diddy. I mean, this brother was paid.
That's actor Blair Underwood. He might be considered among the breed of the more respectable Sidney Poitier types in Hollywood.
Lincoln Perry is one of my heroes, and I'll tell you why. Because he was a businessman. Everybody has a certain role to play. We're all soldiers in the war. Lincoln Perry's legacy was one of the battles. I would say he won the battle because he opened the door and he was able to say that I am a commodity worth a certain amount of money. The next generation had leverage because of what he did, and we've built upon that. Mr. Poitier after Lincoln Perry, Will, Denzel, Cuba, all of us, we stand on the shoulders of Lincoln Perry.
But by the late 1930s, Perry's star was dimming. The NAACP was gaining some influence in Hollywood and had effectively demonized him. Meantime, Perry was in a constant battle with Fox Studios.
His insistent drive was to be considered the same way they considered white actors.
That meant same billing, same money. He never won that battle. By 1940, he'd walked away from Hollywood for good. A few years later, he was broke and bitter. On top of that, he'd become persona non grata among the emerging civil rights generation, a symbol of something Black America wanted to forget. Lincoln Perry fell into obscurity. Mel Watkins found him at a California nursing home 2 years before he died in 1978. Watkins says that although he was debilitated by a stroke, he was still determined to defend the character he'd created and the trail he'd blazed.
In fact, he went back to his room when I was there. He brought out this ream of articles, and he started showing me all these articles and pictures and pointing to things and trying to talk about how great he was and what an impact he had on society at that time. He wasn't defeated. Although he was bitter, he was still fighting to reconstruct that image.
Roy Hurst, NPR News.
Me and the judge sure ain't gonna get elected now.
Niggas is a beautiful thing.
You knew Jack Johnson. I heard he had some kind of punch, and it was so fast, it could knock you out without the crowd. I see it.
Fetch Clay, Make Man is the title of a remarkable new play about the unexpected friendship between Muhammad Ali and actor Stepin Fetchit.
Which I never knew anything about that, Susan. I never knew that Muhammad Ali and Stepin Fetchit were pals.
And it's a true story. They were pals. The play is written by Will Power, and it stars in an incandescent performance, so says the New York Times.
Wait, I've got the review right here.
Ray Fisher.
All right, now, so Ray, I pick up the paper today, and Will and Ray, I pick up the paper today. You guys are on the front page, a rave review from Charles Isherwood for Fetch Clay, Make Man, and then I do the jump here to page 7. And I mean, listen, Charles is going gaga for you. As Ali, Mr. Fisher gives an incandescent performance that also makes room for the brooding moments of self-doubt. Charles goes on to say, Mr. Fisher's smooth, good looks really do seem to justify Ali's boast that he's as pretty as a girl. I think Charles Isherwood has a little crush on you, Mr. Fisher.
Well, I appreciate him for that.
All right, Will, so give us the story of this play, how you came to write it, and tell us about this relationship between Muhammad Ali and Stepin Fetchit.
Yeah, well, the idea for the play came when I saw a picture of them together. Which really blew my mind, because when I was growing up, I learned that Stepin Fetchit was an opposite to Muhammad Ali.
And I've got to interject, a lot of the young people I've talked to around here don't even know who Stepin Fetchit is, white and black alike. Who was Stepin Fetchit?
Stepin Fetchit was a character made famous in the late 20s and early 1930s in Hollywood that kind of epitomized the kind of lazy, shuffling stereotype of an African-American man.
Hurry up now. All right. Actually running now.
And so he was a comic actor.
And he was really Lincoln Perry.
Yeah, his real name was Lincoln Perry. Right. And so his idea was he was going to come into Hollywood with this character, become famous, and then add other characters. You know what I mean? That was going to be his entry point. But because of the times, because there was a lot of racism at that time, he was not allowed to grow out of that. And what he tried to do was, even within that stereotype, he tried to put humanity and kind of a trickster energy into it. But by the time the 50s and then the 60s rolled around, where this play takes place, he was considered like the traitor, the Uncle Tom, an embarrassment to both black and white Americans.
How did he hook up with Muhammad Ali?
So Muhammad Ali, as the story goes, sought out Stepin Fetchit because at this time in 1965, Stepin Fetchit, according to Ali, was the only one that was still alive who knew the great boxer Jack Johnson really well.
Oh,
and so Muhammad Ali wanted to know the secrets of Jack Johnson. In particular, he wanted to know this secret punch called the anchor punch that he supposedly had. So that's all true. At least that's what they say is true. So Stepin Fetchit came into the camp. A lot of people were like, oh my God, how can Stepin Fetchit and Muhammad Ali be friends? It makes no sense. And they were together for a period of time, in which time, according to Ali, he learned this punch from Stepin Fetchit, who learned it from Jack Johnson, and that was the punch that knocked out Sonny Liston in the rematch.
But the play, though, is really your imagination, right?
Yeah,
what goes on between these two?
Right.
Who represent different things.
That's right.
One is the old stereotype of the black man, and Ali is the new black man.
That's right, absolutely. And I've never been able to find out really if that really happened or not. We know that's the story they gave.
Yeah.
But for me, what was more fun, and of course this is theater, is let's imagine that was true, because it might have been.
Yeah.
And how did it play out? How did it manifest? And as you know, oftentimes in literature and in theater, the fool, like even in Shakespeare and King Lear, the fool oftentimes is very wise.
Yes.
And Stepin Fetchit, the real man behind the character Lincoln Perry, was a shrewd businessman, negotiated his own contracts, was a journalist for a while for the Chicago Defender.
That's right.
And so he was a complex guy. So I took it from the premise of maybe he did know this knowledge and what would happen when old and new come together.
Didn't Ali also play the fool in his own way?
Absolutely.
So that they were vibing together in
vibing together.
No, they were vibing.
The lingo.
No, I love it. I love it. No, you're absolutely right. I feel like, at first glance, Muhammad Ali and Stepin Fetchit seem to be polar opposites. And when people hear about this play, they're really intrigued. It's like, how could they be friends? But if you look behind at the complexities of both of them, like you said, they both played the fool to their advantage. They both were tricksters.
Yeah.
And they both were into poetry and kind of trying to craft out an image.
Now, Ray, Mr. Incandescent over there, let me ask you, to portray Muhammad Ali, did you spend a good deal of time looking at interviews with him, watching boxing matches?
A lot of interviews. Luckily, he wasn't shy in front of the camera.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of footage, a lot of boxing footage as well, and reading about him, actually. And reading about the people that he chose to associate himself with. They could give you a much more candid view of Ali than Ali, doing his whole, I'm the greatest on the camera. What I was more interested in is finding out who this person is behind that.
Right.
Behind all the bravado.
I want to tell you, I one time saw Muhammad Ali. He passed me. I was at a rally for Harold Washington in Chicago way back, and he already was afflicted with Parkinson's. Yeah, and he walked into the room, and he was the most magnetic person I have ever seen. And you play him very well, but he just was the most exciting. Just the energy, even sick, he gave out was so magnetic.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, there's a lot of training that's gone into this. My trainer is Michael Elijah Day Jr., who runs an Aerospace High Performance Center, which is a boxing gym. Michael was a boxer in the mid-'80s. And he was at one time a #1 contender for the for the middleweight championship.
So you've been taking boxing lessons?
I've been taking boxing lessons, classes, and everything like that. Eating,
Did you have to bulk up a little bit?
I did have to bulk up. I was about.
Charles Isher would notice.
Well, I was back at during the original run of this at the McCarter. I was about 15 pounds lighter.
Wow.
Than I am now. Yes.
So now you've been working on this play for a number of years. You had a production at the McCarter Theater, but this new production at the New York Theater Workshop on 4th Street is directed by Des McAnaugh, the Tony-winning director of Jersey Boys. What did he bring to your production?
Well, I would love to get your feedback on that. I'll say for me, he brought, first of all, an amazing sense of dramaturgy. So
he helped you sculpt the play?
Absolutely. Before he got involved, the story was there, but it was not clear how it was being told. And as you said, there's so many different issues in this play, so many sensitive issues. So how do you really tell the story and streamline it? So he really helped with that. He also helped with the rhythm of the piece from a textural point of view, the pacing of it. And because he comes from a music background as well, and also I come from music too, and we were able to kind of have a conversation in shorthand.
You were a musical performer, a singer, and then also a playwright. But you certainly bring that sensibility into your work. So Des just enhanced it.
Absolutely. You know, I came up in like hip hop culture and the spoken word. Even though I'm doing more, theater and playwriting now, that sense of rhythm, I think I utilize in the play. And then of course, Dez's staging, of course, is legendary.
But it's very interesting, this connection between writing and music, because I remember many interviews we've had over the years with Edward Albee, and Edward Albee always, when he's writing his plays, he thinks of them as quartets or a symphony, and it's the music form that is in his mind when he sits down to actually do the writing of the play.
Yeah, it's really similar. I feel like the words are notes. They're musical notes, and every word has a different sound.
Yeah.
When you put certain words together, they make certain energy. Sometimes it might be a chord that's like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Sometimes it flows in harmony, and hopefully I'll lay it out for the actors to bring their amazing work in and then elevate it.
Well, there's definitely power in the words.
Yeah, we got to wrap it up, but I want to ask you, Ray, after a review like that, is the phone ringing off the hook? Is your agent fielding calls right and left for Hollywood offers and whatnot?
I actually don't have an agent or a manager. Never had an agent or a manager. I'm actually
let's see how long
Let's see how long that lasts.
Now, as it stands, so, the phone is definitely ringing though.
By the time this airs, you'll have one.
So.
we want to
the next time we have him on, we'll have to go through layers of
That's
publicity people. He'll be too busy. He'll be in his trailer filming.
No,
stay humble.
Call me whenever you want.
Our
number will stay the same.
Okay, Ray Fisher, terrific performance as Muhammad Ali.
Thank you, sir.
In Will Power's play Fetch, Clay, Make Man.
And I want to just quickly mention the rest of the cast, not the whole rest of the cast, but you've got Nikki M. James, right?
We love her. She was from Book of Mormon.
Richard Macer, and as Stepin Fetchit, a wonderful performance, K. Todd Freeman.
That's right, and also John Earl
Jokes as Brother Rashid.
As the evil.
The play is Fetch, Clay, Make Man at the New York Theater Workshop by Will Power and starring Ray Fisher. Don't miss it. Congratulations on the success of the play.
Thank you.
Thank
Thanks
you.
both.
Thank you.
Who got your prediction for the fight? What round is he going to fall in, champ? I cannot tell you the prediction, because if I say what's going to happen and you tell the world, well, they might not come.
Niggas is a beautiful thing.
Today it's time to stop singing and start swinging.
We're coming to get our check.
You are now listening to P.A.R. That's People Activity Radio.
We're just good for nothing, they don't figure.
And I'm your host, John.
Now we can't hardly stand for
JohnGHorse.
We people who are darker than blue. Are we gonna stand around this town and let what others say come true?
Talk to him, Kurt. Talk to him.
We people who are darker than blue.
That's black classified.
Are we gonna stand around this town and let what others say come true?
Y'all know better than that. Welcome. You have found your family in a peaceful place. P.A.R. is a family-friendly information distribution program seeking to inform non-white people, in particular, black classified, and assisting in counter-racist codification. The title of today's episode is The Tragic Legacy of Acting Black, Episode 2. Lincoln Stepin Fetchit Perry, the trailblazing scapegoat of anti-black pop culture. One more time. The title of today's episode is The Tragic Legacy of Acting Black, Episode 2. Lincoln Stepin Fetchit Perry, the trailblazing scapegoat of anti-black pop culture.
We people who are darker than blue.
Yes, indeed.
Are we gonna stand around this town and let what others say come true? We people who are darker than blue. Are we gonna stand around this town and let what others say come true?
You are now listening to P.A.R., that's People Activity Radio, hosted by JohnGHorse, a blue-collar commentary radio podcast attempting to remove confusion in everyday social events. If you are subject to non-white classification, in particular black classified, welcome. You have found your family in a peaceful place.
Oh, where do we begin? Where do we begin is always the question. And I am your gracious and humble host, John G. Horse. You have indeed found your family in a peaceful place. And let me repeat the title of today's episode one more time. The title of today's episode is The Tragic Legacy of Acting Black, Episode 2. Lincoln Stepin Fetchit Perry, the Trailblazing Scapegoat of anti-black pop culture.
Niggas is a beautiful thing.
And I know those of you who are not familiar with the show is going to ask, what do you mean by Trailblazing Scapegoat, John G. Horse? Well, let's get into the conversation. Let's get it in. As you heard in the clips that I played before, this episode is going to pretty much focus on the big elephant in the room. This episode is going to focus on the designated bad guy. This episode is going to focus on the MARK, as they would say in the West Coast, the anti-black face minstrelsy mark. You understand me? And old John G is going to attempt to remove confusion on the tragic legacy of acting black within the United States entertainment industry that we know as Hollywood. On the first installment of the tragic legacy of acting black, I focused on Bert Williams. And if you remember the first installment, Bert Williams died at an extremely young age. I believe he was around 45, 46, 47 years old when he passed away. He had two partners that he began his illustrious career in acting black with, who passed away around the age of 28, 29, and 32, I believe. One was a female. She passed away around 28, 29, and her husband, he passed away around 32 years old. And I concluded on the first installment of the tragic legacy of acting black that some of the hardest working people in show business in the history of this nation, some of the hardest working people in the nation's history are people subject to black classification. And in particular, when you're working in the entertainment industry, not only are you working 2 times, 3 times, 4 times, 5 times, 6 times, 7 times, 8 times, 9 times, 10 times as hard as your white counterparts in order to sell tickets and to get some sort of profit. Not only are you working 10 times as hard, you also are under constant stress and duress, because if you are part of a traveling troupe in the 1800s, and the early 1900s, and you're subject to black classification, your safety is always compromised. Let's just say if you were to be in a black traveling troupe, you'd find out real quick how white supremacy worked, because you may do a weekend performance or a weekend session with a suspected white supremacist city or community or hall or church, and when it's time to pay the money, the people who classify themselves as white and probably tell you to your face that they practice the religion of racism, white supremacy, you ain't getting paid, get on up the road, nigga, or we gonna string you up. And there were many cases, documented and undocumented, that people subject to black classification in these traveling troupes just wound up missing, wound up strung up on a tree, wound up going through the wrong door, wound up off the planet. And it is safe to conclude that they found themselves off the planet, mistreated, raped, killed, robbed, etc., because they were subject to black classification in a global system of racism, white supremacy, in particular in a country that was founded off of racism, white supremacy. That being said, we are discussing Stepin Fetchit today. Now, I had to take my time with this one. The clips went on a little longer than normal. Because I didn't want to bog down my presentation with all the historical footnotes and facts. If you want to know all the historical footnotes and facts, you can refer to the first 57 minutes of this episode. That being said, this particular episode is mostly inspired by the Amazon video series called Them. And I believe the male lead and the female lead in the series, and I could be in error, are subject to black classification. Well, they are black classified. I just don't know if they're the leads because you got a whole bunch of white characters in it, but the show's presented as if they are the leads, the male and the female, and they're just being mistreated throughout the entire series. That being said, I'm not going to give any spoilers on the series except this one. The one thing that caught my eye on this particular series was the trailer, and in one of the trailers had a person in blackface on stage. And whenever I see blackface, I immediately just refer to the history. I kind of study this stuff. In particular, I'm always studying the remnants of blackface minstrelsy that remains in contemporary film still to this day in the 21st century. That being said, I saw an individual with a black face, and I already knew what was going to follow that. You cannot follow somebody on stage with a top hat, with big white eyes, big red or white teeth, loose-fitting, unkempt clothes.
Niggas is a beautiful thing.
Smiling, cheesing, and tapping on stage. There ain't nothing good if you're subject to black classification that's going to come from that imagery and or that age-old mimicry, that caricature that was created for the entertainment of people who classify themselves as white and religiously believed and or practice anti-black racism, white supremacy for an American United States pastime. Just like American pie, apple pie, picking at the misfortunes, making fun of enslaved black people on a plantation is a United States pastime no different than Major League Baseball. You understand me? Now that's either true or it's not true. And from that premise, when I saw that trailer with who they call on the show Amazon video series Them, who they call Tap Dance Man. Now, God, dog.
Niggas is a beautiful thing.
Tap Dance Man is going to let you know what he's going to be doing in the show. That being said, Tap Dance Man, to my circumference of knowledge, is the first horror film zip coon dandy in the history of cinema. Now, I could be in error. I don't study cinema, but I watch a lot of old film, not just blackface minstrelsy, just a bunch of old films back in the 20s, 30s, and 40s, and they are filled with treats and tricks of anti-black racism, white supremacy, because from my understanding, in the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, the system of racism, white supremacy was not as refined as it is in the 21st century. That being said, you can only refine evil mistreatment so much. But at the end of the day, if you look at everything through the lens of anti-blackness and or racism, white supremacy, they can refine it all they want to, but it's pretty much hidden in plain sight. Now, that's either true or it's not true. Let's move on.
Niggas is a beautiful thing.
That being said, the foundation of the entertainment industry that we know as Hollywood was pretty much founded off of a blockbuster film named Birth of a Nation. I played a clip of a documentary done by Bill Cosby, who pointed this fact out, and he gave his commentary regarding the film Birth of a Nation, I believe directed by W.D. Griffith. self-proclaimed white supremacist, Ku Klux Klan, slavery, Confederate States sympathizer. You understand me? That being said, he had to be financed, and he was financed by a group of individuals that also classified themselves as white, who had resources, and they were in the film industry. He had to convince these people who classified themselves as white, who had resources and were in the film industry, why they needed to invest more than usual in this particular film. He himself knew that it would be a hit. He didn't, maybe not a blockbuster, but he knew it would be a hit, and he wanted to do a film. He had ambitions of doing longer, more dramatic films with motion picture. And I believe he was the first motion picture and sound film, if I'm not mistaken. I think he had a soundtrack going on in the background or something. I did a video article on W.D. Griffith. I hope I'm not saying his name wrong. I'm sorry. I get all my suspected white supremacist names mixed up, especially I'm getting up in age. But I digress. But like I said, Griffith, who's known to be the father of film, he gets credit for that, was a stomp down racist white supremacist that put together a piece of work that still is being studied in film school today, and that is Birth of a Nation. Refer to my video article, The White Supremacist Origins of Hollywood, and I break that down in 3 parts. Let's move on. That being said, this film was the foundation of what we now know as the entertainment industry of Hollywood. Pretty much, those who saw the success of that anti-black, racist, white supremacist film that starred the cavalry and the heroes of that film was the Ku Klux Klan. Not only did it increase the membership of the Ku Klux Klan in 1915, I believe, when the film was done, it increased the membership of the Ku Klux Klan, and that what followed the increase in membership was the increase of lynchings in the United States as well. So now you had a booming entertainment industry being formed and or founded and or birthed, and no pun intended, the film Birth of a Nation. Hell, the nation of Hollywood was birthed from that film.
Niggas is a beautiful thing.
You also had an institution by the name of the NAACP that also got a lot of notoriety because it spent a lot of time protesting said film. Now, this is old John G talking, and this is strictly my opinion. You had a lot of intellectual, well-to-do, respectable people subject to black classification that were recruited into this institution that we know as the NAACP. From my research, I think that there was an organization that was founded by people subject to black classification by the name of the Niagara institution that was a advocate for justice for people subject to black classification. I believe the best and the brightest of that Niagara institution, and I'll get that correct title of the institution that these individuals were in, but I do know that W.E.B. Du Bois was one of the individuals that helped found and form the Niagara Institution. I believe it was formed up in the Michigan area. I could be in error. I apologize for not having the accurate information, but this is not what this particular episode is about. But I do plan on getting that information into an episode that will follow this episode as soon as possible. That being said, there was a black organization that was advocating for justice for people subject to black classification. The best and the brightest from that black organization was recruited by the NAACP. The NAACP was not formed and founded by black folks. As far as I know, it was formed by people who classify themselves as white. I believe it was a rabbi and a couple of abolitionist type individuals. And clearly, the white institution, from my understanding, and I could be in error, simply was cutting checks and was a little bit better financed than the struggle institution of the people who were subject to black classification. That being said, the best and the brightest got recruited from over there. I believe it was Ida B. Wells and W.E.B. Du Bois, who were recruited, which were the face. They were Negro showcased. They were the face of the NAACP, but the leadership and the financing of the NAACP were the usual suspects, people who classify themselves as white, and we suspect believed in the religion of white supremacy, no matter what religious faith that they claim that they practice. Under the context of racism, white supremacy, there is no higher power, there is no higher government, there is no higher religion than the religion of racism, white supremacy, and or the government of racism and white supremacy. Let's move on. That being said, this institution of entertainment, this institution of anti-black entertainment, making fun of people subject to black classification who were enslaved on plantation, pretty much plantation celebration culture. Anti-black pop culture was the founding basis of entertainment in the United States, and as I spoke about in the previous episode, the globe. And this was as far back as the early 1800s, hell, the 1700s, as far back that you saw people being mistreated based upon some type of ethnic difference and or black classification.
Niggas is a beautiful
Clearly,
thing.
the black classification had staying power because still today, from my perspective, it still exists within the entertainment industry of Hollywood. That being said, you had an individual that by the name of Lincoln Perry. Now, he had a long name. Refer back to the clips that I played at the beginning of the show to get the accurate long name of Lincoln Perry. But Lincoln Perry's father and mother, from my understanding, were Caribbean islanders subject to black classification.
Niggas is a beautiful thing.
I believe the father was from Jamaica and the mother, I think, was from the Virgin Islands and or the Bahamas. I could be in error. All that information is at the beginning of this podcast, the first 57 minutes. That being said, his mother was a God-fearing religious woman. I believe she was some sort of homemaker, and I believe the father knew some type of trade or took odd jobs. He also was an entertainer, and old Lincoln Perry went along with his daddy when he did his little struggle blackface minstrelsy troupe voyages. And if you want to look at blackface minstrelsy in real time and look at it not in the romantic form that you'd see in a film in the 1920s and the 1930s and the 1940s and the 1950s, you want to look at it for what it was. If you were subject to black classification and you were doing blackface minstrelsy, if you was doing these minstrelsy troops and you was running around here acting black to feed yourself, to pay the bills, to make a living, you had to go all out. It had to be, you had to sell your characters. You had to coon, buck, dance, shine in order to get people's attention, to get word, to get a buzz in the black communities, because people didn't have money as it is, and if they're going to spend their hard-earned money, you understand me? It better be some shucking and jiving, popping up in that piece. That being said, I can imagine a young Lincoln Perry becoming extremely drawn to that life. Now, in that life, you got to understand, it's a whole bunch of stuff popping in the so-called black communities on a blackface minstrelsy troupe circuit. You got to understand, it was entertainment going on. It was drug dealing going on. It was moonshine selling going on. It was under economy activity going on. So you could not be soft, because not only did you have to perform, it had to be a great performance, you also had to ensure that you were protected, because your life could be in danger traveling around the United States in the early 1900s and late 1800s. Not only that, you had to make sure the so-called owners or the promoters would pay you your money. So you couldn't be no softy walking around just smiling and tap dancing and singing songs. You also had to be known to don't mess with this individual. You better pay him his money or there's going to be some consequences. Just setting the palette. You understand me? For what type of individuals had to be on these minstrelsy troops. Let's move on. But to make a long story short, I am saying all this to get to this one point, because I'm not going to drag this on out. I am saying all this to get to this one point. There was an industry of entertainment that had existed for, and I'm just rounding to the nearest century, at least 100 years before Lincoln Perry was born. This young man grew up, developed in his formative years in a toxic anti-black society which rewarded people, in particular people subject to black classification, who could perpetuate images that were not constructive and or healthy for not only the performer, but for people watching these performances. And that is acting black. There is a such thing as acting black, and that came from this industry of anti-black pop culture, songs, dances, plays, you name it, it was formed. The circus, festivals, traveling troops, everything was formed about people subject to black classification being the butt of the joke, and in particular, black males. Not if you weren't a magic Negro or old Uncle Ben or Uncle Tom that was at every beck and call of anybody classified as white on the particular show or stage. If you wasn't one of these magic Negroes always handing out advice to white children, white men, white women, if you weren't a mammy, if you wasn't a buck, if you wasn't a Jezebel, if you wasn't a Sapphire, if you wasn't a doggone Zip Coon Dandy, if you wasn't a coon, you understand me? If you wasn't a big bad white woman feverish over white women brute.
Niggas is a beautiful thing.
You were the shiftless, no-count, mumbling, bumbling fool. Scared of everything. Scared of the sound of your own voice. You understand me? Scared of sheets, scared of white sheets. Scared of black sheets, scared of black women, scared of white women, scared of white men. You were useless, shiftless, no-count, mumbling, bumbling fool. And our ancestor, Lincoln Perry, and or AKA Stepin Fetchit, mastered the performance of the shiftless, no-count, mumbling, bumbling fool. It was the only show in town. And from what all the writers said in his time and in our time today, he was the cast to ever act black in this particular caricature and or creature feature was Stepin Fetchit. Now, there was a whole bunch of white men and white women that acted black that did
niggas is a beautiful thing.
Justice to anti-blackness. But when this brother put his spin on it, it can never be duplicated. It will never be duplicated. But here in 2021, old John G says that we all act like Stepin Fetchit every time we step our foot out the door and have to go into these workplaces, have to go into the bank, have to go into the doggone grocery store, have to go into the shopping center. You want to be as less threatening as possible so that you don't cause no white people no stress or harm. You want to safely get out your door and you want to safely get home. And the best way to get home, day in, day out, the best way to keep your job, the best way to get that registration, the best way to get that loan, the best way to survive out here in these anti-black, racist, white supremacist United States is to show them pearly whites. Now, we can sit up here and talk crazy about Lincoln Perry for performing and getting paid as if he had a choice, especially since he was a very ambitious young man. See, ambition and black classification is kind of an oxymoron, because if you're ambitious, that means you have to take your talent to people who classify themselves as white. Please tell me, where was Lincoln Perry gonna go to make $2 million in the 1920s or 30s with the talent that he had? I'm quite sure Lincoln Perry was on the chitlin circuit Ain't made no doggone $2 million. You understand me? And then you have the institution of the NAACP put out a campaign talking about we don't want that particular image on the screen anymore. And instead of putting out a protest campaign and boycotting the institution of Hollywood and getting the best and brightest people that they had in that institution of the NAACP and forming economic groups and PACs to form counter entertainment institution financed and owned by black folks, they sat up there and tried to negotiate with the institution of Hollywood, where it was based off of anti-black racism, talking about some ease up the racism. And instead of hitting the institution in the mouth who was responsible for producing and distributing and filming and greenlighting all these anti-black projects, they put all that energy into Lincoln Perry and blamed him.
Niggas is a beautiful thing.
For playing the role that he was paid to play. To me, that did not make any sense. Yes, you can critique Lincoln Perry for doing something that was not advantageous, wasn't constructive. You can take that argument, but why don't we have that same energy with people who we love to promote in society? For example, I hear all the time that Michael Jordan was the greatest of all times. You understand me? Michael Jordan played for white folks. Michael Jordan ran for white folks. Michael Jordan smiled for white folk. Michael Jordan slam dunked for white folk. Michael Jordan won championships for a white institution that we all know as the Chicago Bulls. You understand me? Oh, sweetness, Walter Payton. Oh, he was one of the best to ever do it. Jim Brown, I know it cut you deep. He was one of the best to ever do it. Oh, Barack Obama. He was the first president of the white supremacist institution known as the United States of America. You understand me? They got a whole bunch of blood on that flag of the stars and bars, or the stripes and stars. You understand me? The national anthem was written by self-proclaimed white supremacist Francis Scott Key, that has a particular verse in that doggone so-called anti-black song, which comes out of the discipline of minstrelsy in those days and the mentality of the United States. That song points out the disdain for people subject to black classification. You could go on and on and on about all the compromises that people subject to black classification have to make day in, day out. Old John G., when he clocks in and clocks out from his plantation, goes to work, and I better show them pearly whites, or I might not have any place to show up.
Niggas is a beautiful thing.
The next day. And the hell we gonna blame Lincoln Perry for images that existed before he was born? That's like blaming doggone Jesse Jackson and Al Sharpton for being ambulance chasers or something like that. Racism white supremacy existed before Jesse Jackson and Al Sharpton. How can they be treated as if they are the ones who create racism? And I'm speaking specifically people who classify themselves as white and we suspect believe in racism white supremacy. But that's neither here nor there. My point is this.
Niggas is a beautiful thing.
Lincoln Perry was a person subject to black classification that had a skill set that was in demand. With that skill set that was in demand, he also was extremely ambitious. Ambition, skill set in demand.
Niggas is a beautiful thing.
Who's ever going to pay the competitive wage most likely is going to get the highest skill set or most of the talent. And unfortunately for Lincoln Perry, who could sing, who could dance, who could probably do other characters, the checks was getting cut for Stepin Fetchit. And when the industry of Hollywood got called out, I suspect they spoke to their buddies who also formed the NAACP. All right, we're going to throw you a bone. We're going to throw you old Lincoln Perry. And people who are told to me are extremely intelligent. W.E.B. Du Bois. You understand me? John Hope Franklin headed a campaign which focused on Lincoln Perry, not the institution of Hollywood, nor do I see any campaign in the history to form a counter institution, a counter entertainment institution. From my understanding, we had black basketball, we had black football, we had black baseball, we had black everything. And I think we had a black institution of black entertainment, filmmaking in Chicago. I forget the brother's name. You understand me? Why was that not invested in? Now, if you look at those films that was made in that black institution by that black filmmaker, you'll see a lot of the same caricatures and creatures that you saw in the doggone institution of Hollywood. So we have a embedded culture of anti-blackness that has seeped not only in white society, but it was soaked within our mindsets, and it still is today. Now, this is old John G doing a rant because one thing that I have concluded, and I get this from Nearly Fuller Jr., under the system of racism, white supremacy, all victims are equal. How the hell are you going to blame Lincoln Perry for something that was created before he existed? And for this trailblazer of entertainment to be ignored, one of the talentedest individuals. Hell, they give Bert Williams credit, one of the focuses of my first tragic legacy of acting black. They give Bert Williams credit. Bert Williams wore a black face and perpetuated the same images.
Niggas is a beautiful thing.
As Stepin Fetchit, a.k.a. Lincoln Perry. Lincoln Perry had a family. Lincoln Perry had children. You understand me? Lincoln Perry wasn't perfect. Lincoln Perry was struggling with black classification like we still struggle today. Lincoln Perry went to work and did his job. Lincoln Perry, from my understanding, led a very interesting life. And one thing that caught my attention and I thought that was very important, and I put it on the clips earlier, Lincoln Perry had a relationship with Jack Johnson, the first heavyweight champion in the United States of America. Now, he wasn't the first qualified individual that was classified as black to win the heavyweight championship, but he was the first person subject to black classification that got the opportunity to whoop somebody white behind in the heavyweight division. And he whooped him until they, I think, arrested him and took him out of the doggone competition with some trumped up charges, but that'll be a subject for later. Now, he knew Jack Johnson, one of the greatest of all times, and he also was sought after by, at the time, Cassius Clay, who we know today as Muhammad Ali. Stepin Fetchit, Zip Coon Dandy, Stepin Fetchit, Lincoln Perry, Stepin Fetchit, shiftless, no count, mumbling, bumbling fool, writer, dancer, singer, actor, journalist. Oh, yes, he was a journalist. I believe he wrote for the Chicago, hold on, let me get this name. I got to look at my notes. The Chicago Defender. And let's give a shout out to black media, because that was the publication that Lincoln Perry wrote reviews about entertainment on. You understand me? Shiftless, no count, mumbling, bumbling fool, writer, dancer, singer, actor, journalist, rapper, supreme entertainer. Who's going to tell his story? Where's the movie on Lincoln Perry? I bet you it's a movie on Charlie Chaplin, who also was a shiftless, no count, mumbling, bumbling fool.
Niggas is a beautiful thing.
You understand me? Where's the film on Bert Williams? Where's the film on Lincoln Perry? And I ain't finished because there's a whole bunch of our ancestors that subjected themselves to that Negro trauma drama and opened doors for people to come behind them and present us with less toxic images. Now, it's always going to be a little bit of toxin as long as you dealing with the institution of Hollywood. And that's old John G talking. I will end this show with the same thing I end the last show with. Old John G has a dream. And the dream goes like this. People subject to black classification, get your own stuff and be prepared to protect it. Now, read into that how you want. And I hope I have contributed to less confusion. And always remember, keep learning and stay codified.
We're just good for nothing, they all figure. A boy's grown up shiftless jigger. Now we can't hardly stand for that. Or is that really where it's at?
Economics, education, entertainment, labor, law, politics, religion, sex, and war.
If you do not understand racism, which is white supremacy, what it is and how it works, everything else that you understand will only confuse you. Confuse you. Confuse you. Confuse you. Confuse you. If you do not understand, confuse you. If you do not understand, confuse you. If you do not understand, confuse you. Confuse you.
My definition of white supremacy and racism, I use those two terms as synonyms. I use the same definition for both terms. That definition is as follows: a global system of people who classify themselves as white and are dedicated to abusing and or subjugating everyone in the known universe whom they classify as not white.
Economics, education, entertainment, labor, law, politics, religion, sex, and war.